All right, now that everybody's a little bit more settled in, we can get going. And I just want to start us off. My name is Clifford Ballantyne. I am the manager of youth and caregiver engagement with the Saskatchewan Integrated Youth Services. I want to start us off in a good way, and by acknowledging the land that I'm from and where I'm at, and that's Treaty 6. Specifically Sturgeon Lake First Station. And so I am Plains and Woodlands Korea, and from my understanding is, this is where my people originate from. I think we've had a lot of challenges with our in the last 500 years of, our new way of doing things. And I understand that it hasn't always been the easiest way of moving forward. But, with some of the work that I do around working with non-Indigenous people, I'm really trying to move towards how can we work together in a way that is meaningful for us and is respectful. And so I feel, we're moving in the right direction around all of that. And so with that, let's get into it. I want to introduce Claire Tuckanow and also Dr. Carolyn Melro. And today we're going to be talking about community mapping and the importance of youth engagement. So our objective today is to describe community mapping, highlight the importance of youth engagement, and share lessons from the field. So Carolyn, did you want to take us away?
Yeah, thanks, Cliff, for the introduction. I will also just say that you may hear Felipe Melro in the background. He wants to participate and is eager to do youth mapping when he's older. I don't know why it's not letting me start video. Okay, perfect. And let's just see if I can. Perfect. Okay, so I have control over the slides now too. So what is community mapping? Community mapping is a process that allows organizations or peoples who are providing services, particularly around youth mental health, so community health centers, or people who are supporting youth in accessing services. So these could be peer support workers, to assess the existing services and programs in their community that help and support youth and their well-being, as well as identify program gaps or areas for improvement, so opportunities to implement missing services. So undergoing a community mapping exercise is an important step in providing the best care to support young people, as well as their family and carers. It's also important to note, sorry, that was a delayed shift, but it's also important to note that community mapping is not an inventory or repertoire of available services to youth, but rather it's an ongoing participatory development strategy that engages diverse stakeholders, so mental health therapists, clinicians, youth themselves, their families, and guides youth in the process to canvass their own communities to identify existing services, but again, also the gaps in service provision. So youth is bolded because Saskatchewan is focused on developing an integrated youth service network. And so it's really important that youth and caregivers voices lead the way in this work. And it's also, again, important to talk about how youth are engaged within the process. So what does youth-driven community mapping look like, and how do we create it? So when we talk about community mapping and youth engagement, we are stressing the importance of ensuring youth are engaged in the process. And there's varying levels of how youth could participate in mapping exercises. So Claire will highlight an example of how youth were engaged in a community mapping exercise. And it's really, again, important to include youth's voices, and Claire will stress this, to ensure that we're understanding service provision from the perspectives and experiences of youth and young adults accessing services. So we might have an awareness of what community services exist and are able to refer to our colleagues, but youth might not have the same access or knowledge if they're relying on online sources. And so Claire will speak more about that, but I just really want to drive home the importance of youth-driven community mapping when we go through how we will create it. So when we get started, I just want to note that mapping is an ongoing process and a live document. So it's a great way to start engaging or continue to engage with youth from the community of interest, as well as other relevant key stakeholders, such as I have listed on the screen, family members, elders, community organizations, as well as decision and policymakers. And with engaging youth and other stakeholder within this work, you want to work towards inclusion. So ask yourself, is there any missing voices, and how can we include them? And again, by engaging youth in this process, really allows them to drive the process if they're confident and willing to do so. So that takes a bit of relationship building. It's not just getting a group of youth and say, okay, we're going to do community mapping. What do you want to map? It's all about building relationships and ensuring that you're working with the individual and meeting them where they're at. By doing so, this allows the map to be built from the youth experiences and perspectives. And again, just highlights what services youth are accessing, what they find helpful, as well as any opportunities for growth. And then when structuring the mapping activity itself, consider power dynamics and how to facilitate spaces that include broad perspectives. So it may be that youth may not be comfortable to speak openly about their experiences accessing services if a representative from that service is present. So it's really about working with youth to make sure they're comfortable and identifying different spaces to do this mapping exercise to allow those voices to be heard and then to be incorporated into a larger community map. So it's just really, a good opportunity to just make sure everyone is feeling safe and included in this space. The next step, now it was going so fast early, now it doesn't want to go. Okay. Yes, sorry for the technical glitches. So the next step is to identify resources to map. So this is, again, good to engage youth in the process. If it's a group of youth already established, ask them kind of what services they want to map, or you can use community mapping as that engagement tool to build relationships. So it's kind of twofold. But make sure that the scope of the map is doable. And so you want to really think about, well, what kind of resources do we have to carry out the mapping exercise, as well as what kind of groups we want to focus on. And that's where youth input can come in. And so are you looking at a specific gender group, a geographical area, a certain type of service? Are you looking for mapping programs across an age defined group? Really making sure you set those parameters at the start. As well as when you're going through identifying resources, also think about the informal. So the individual strengths youth contribute to the process. And so their perseverance, their resiliency, maybe some cultural teachings or practices that they engage in, as well as those formal, more community institutional assets. And so again, you just want to think holistically of what's available to youth. And then the next one is to really think creatively and choose appropriate methods. So this is a great opportunity to have youth identify which methods to use in the mapping exercise. And this could vary from artistic forms of expression. So I've used art-based community mapping where youth have drawn various like logos, or again, those individual strengths that they find to be supportive in a time of distress. Claire is going to walk us through some digital software, which is really cool. And then there's more like traditional research evaluation methods of survey or focus groups. But I really encourage you, if you're thinking about doing community mapping with youth, driving the process, be creative and allow them to have input into the methods. And then towards the end of your mapping exercise, think about the knowledge translation activity. So this will depend on the way the community youth-driven mapping activity was carried out, who was involved, the resources and expertise available to support the team. So begin by understanding who or what groups of stakeholders may benefit from the knowledge gathered within the mapping exercise. So this can be potentially also informing the methods that you choose. So if you want to do a graphic design and host a community gathering where this graphic is to be displayed, you would want to use that in your mapping exercise instead of trying to take the knowledge you gathered and turn it into a graphic. It might be easier just to start with that process if you know that's your end goal. And so again, a community event with youth, family and caregivers and service providers may be a way to build relations between youth and their family and the community more broadly, to showcase what you have identified as services to support their mental health, as well as, again, those missing pieces. What services would they like to see, and how could those services be integrated to make it more seamless for youth to access services? And this is also a way to facilitate building relationships with other youth. So you could use this community event for youth to put on for their peers, and then for them to ask their peers, what services are we missing? And then facilitate another community mapping, again, because it's really about seeing community mapping as a living document and not something to sit on a bookshelf. You want it to be tangible. And so the way you share this knowledge back is important to close the loop with the group you've engaged with, but also ways to meaningfully engage other youth as well. And so this comes to my last point of keep moving it forward. So as I said at the start, community or youth driven community mapping is not an inventory of available services to youth. Rather, it's a process that is ongoing, and the map is a live document, and it's to be continuously reviewed, and it could be used as an evaluation tool to see how are these services doing, how many youth are accessing these services, how are they finding out about it, how do services interact with each other. And again, it just is a way to keep us asking, how is the information gathered being used? And if so, by whom and to what extent? Because you want community mapping to inform community development work, systems change. And so it's really ensuring that when you create youth-driven mapping, that you're allowing them to participate in meaningful ways and to hear from their own experiences and perspectives to participate in systems change. And so now it's off to Claire to walk us through an example of a youth-driven community mapping exercise that she's worked through and how youth have contributed to that process. So off to you, Claire.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. That was great. So she covered all why we have community maps, the importance of them, who's involved, and now I'm going to show you what we have done with Communities Building Youth Futures Regina and the lessons that we learned, the process of having that youth involvement. And then I would like to share the guide with you all, or our community map at the end. All right, I'm having a little bit of technical difficulties as well. The slides. Sorry. All right. Okay, so like I said, community mapping in a practice, how we done it, the process of it, and also the importance of having our young people who are doing this work. They're capable of being able to do the research, and it's very important that they are the front runners to do it, and with the right accessible tools, they're able to conduct this research for us. So we're super grateful that we had 2 youth contributors who took part in our community mapping, and the outcome of it was great, and I'll also share a little bit about that. All right, so again, with the youth engagement, with any type of engagement, an incentive or honorarium for their youth participation is very important. You know, they're working alongside with us, so for them to be paid an honorarium is super important, as well as having accessibility to technology to conduct their research, accessibility to the internet, to all of the tools that are needed and for their support. And then with our mapping, it's a great way to see where they have the services for them. So the youth supported services, and I'll show you a little bit about that in our youth map. And then also with that guide, it was a really easy outline in a tool where youth were able to really be able to navigate through it. So it was really easy to use for them, and it's also easy and readable for our community. And I will also share some of the lessons from the field from it as well. All right, so first of all, with the guide on the page, which I'll share, we teamed up with Youthful Cities. So what they have done was they went into the other CBYF communities that we have. So there's 20 of them throughout Canada, and each city was able to conduct this research with their youth. So it was all youth driven. And so the youth were able to look for the data in their city. And with Youthful Cities, they were able to create our guide on a pages. So each community has one. And it's a really great way where we can look to what's missing in our communities. And like I mentioned, technology was accessible for the youth to do their research. And another key point was that if data was not available after you search for the services after 30 minutes, it became not available. So that's also stated on the maps. And that really goes to show that, you know, that resource or that service is hard to locate and to have access to. So it's really important that, you know, we look back at this and we see what those topics were, those key areas, and how we can strengthen them. And I'm going to show you our CBYF index, and that could be found on Youthful Cities. And again, you could see all of the other CBYF communities in their resource guides. And you can really see what other communities have strength in as well. And the youth collected data from the 6 key topics. So we had the service navigation, identity and social connection, holistic health and well-being, and accessible education, civic engagement, leadership, and employment and mentorship. So I'm going to go ahead and show you some of that data, and as well share with you our resource map. So again, we teamed up with Youthful Cities. Can everybody see this? Somebody just, can we see it?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, great. All right, so again, this can be all found on Youthful Cities, and it's really important that we have this place where or CBYF communities, we are able to access it. It's really a great tool. And so I'm going to share with you our CBYF index. So again, as I mentioned, we have other communities who conducted with their research and created the guide on the page. We have Prince Albert and Regina here, so you could really kind of filter it out. It's really a great tool. And again, as I mentioned, a lot of the topics were researched by the youth, so they were able to just go online or go in person to conduct their research. And then I'll show you our guide on the page as well with that. So this is our guide on a page. So this is a really great example of a community map. I know Carolyn touched base on the different ways you can create it, but this one was really, really easy to navigate through. So again, we have the service navigation, and you can just see where all of the 2 youth participants who were able to conduct their research, and they went online, they went in person, and we made it accessible for them to and support them when they're looking for these services. And I also mentioned how after 30 minutes of research or going to places they couldn't find that particular service, it just became not available. So we dived into those key areas, so service navigation, identity and social connection, holistic health and well-being, accessible education, employment and mentorship, civic engagement and leadership. And what we did with this, we sent it to our stakeholders as well as our service providers or schools. So they have it, they have like an idea on where we're at. And this was just a really great start for our community to see where we are at with a lot of these topics. It was also great to see, the youth feel proud of themselves for doing this great work. And whenever I share this, I always say, like, the youth did this, this is something that the youth created. And I know Carolyn was talking about living documents, and this is something that we hope to see being updated year to year, just to see where we're going with it. So afterwards, with our initiative, we were able to see what was needed, and what we focused on a lot was having access to those resources and supports and safe spaces. So again, with CBYF, the initiative that I'm working with, we have a leadership, and we also have our youth contributors. So again, we noticed that youth didn't have access to those supports, those safe spaces, and that's evident on here as well. Some of them, it's missing. There's a lot of things that are needed in our community. So again, with the youth, they created this. They have an idea on what's needed to break those barriers from finding employment and furthering their education. And so this is more so our plan on the page. And it was a really great outcome to see how this really took where we were to here, and now we're creating different services, creating more accessibility to those services, and this is all youth driven. And it was really important that we listened to the youth, and we gave them that space, that safe space, and gave them access to all of the tools and supports that they needed to conduct their research, as well as lead this initiative. And I believe Carolyn is also going to talk a little bit about what could go wrong, and she's going to share a story with that.
Yeah, thanks, Claire, for presenting and sharing your work. So I was engaged in doing a focus group with youth to identify what services they were accessing for their mental health from a community perspective. And it was part of a national research project. So the leadership was very top down at the start. And so we got, yeah, Clifford will correct me, but it was like 13 pizza boxes sitting in a healing lodge, and we were waiting, and an hour goes by, and we said, well, why did no youth come? We advertised. We told the health center staff, we put it on the radio, like, why aren't youth coming? And so Clifford said, well, it's because youth don't know who the research and evaluation team is. So we have to build that relationship. And so what we did was we went into the village and we gave out the 13 or 15 boxes of pizza and described who we were and what our role was and what we were hoping to accomplish that summer. And so it took a lot of relationship building with the youth, but eventually by the end of the summer, we were able to create an arts-based asset mapping that really focused on individual strengths. So the gifts that youth perceived to be helpful to their mental health, as well as their peers' mental health, as well as identifying some of the services that we thought were a no-brainer that would be of a great resource to youth for their health. And they said, no, it's not, because we don't feel safe accessing those services, or when those services are offered, that doesn't align with when we can access services. And so it was really telling when we had that failed focus group that, you know, youth need to drive this process. And that's for all research related to youth when you're trying to talk about systems change. And so by allowing youth to drive the community mapping, we were then able to identify those programs that work, as well as those individual strengths that they could contribute to programming. So again, through that asset mapping exercise or community mapping exercise, we were able to identify issues around food. So youth didn't have access to food within community, and that really posed as a barrier to their health and social well-being, as you would imagine. And so we were able to develop a community garden that youth really owned and took control of. To identify that opportunity for growth. So there's great utility of getting youth to drive the process and to develop it from their perspective.
Yeah, and like from that, like that how do you engage young people, or you know, how do you start to get involved in this type of relationship building? And I think a lot of it is based around I guess for lack of a better word, humbling ourselves, you know, is coming to them as like, I'm not sure how to do this, but I want to do this, and I want to do this in a good way. What would make sense for you, and how we can move, you know, this initiative forward. And I think for the early days of this work, that was the challenge of they didn't ask the young people of like, do you actually even care about, you know, these boxes of pizzas? You know, they did the whole radio call out and everything. But then you know, there were 12 of us sitting around that circle of like, yeah, it's been half an hour now since we started and nobody's here. And so, like Carolyn was saying, we went into the community, we went into the villages, and you know, we gave them food, and then throughout the summer we would do hot dogs and wiener roasts and playing soccer and basketball. And that's the thing about like engagement, is that it is a process. It is going to take time. And so if you're doing research around this stuff, or it's implementing some of those that some of the slow process of engagement, putting in time within your research applications, like, you know, we're actually going to engage them for the first 4 months, we're engaging them for the first 6 months, maybe it's going to take 8 months. You know, it all depends on the team as well, and just the willingness to want to be open to the idea of like, you know, we can utilize young people's voices through this process. So yeah, I don't know if you want to jump in there, Claire, around the utilization of voices, or you know, something what you were talking about in, you know, we didn't highlight it within the work that you're doing, but you were you told me at one point, you know, is like, if a person is looking for resources, a young person is looking for resources, and they can't find it in the first, what did you say, 10-15 minutes, then it's not
15 minutes. Yeah, so it just goes to show that well, even for anybody, you know, it's not easy to have that access to it, you know. And again, this is just a tool in our map we have our leaders that look at this and they go like, hey, like something's wrong with that, and we need to spark that change. And again, this wouldn't be possible without the youth being able to do that. So they really started something, to like great, that's going to hopefully be sustainable in the future as well. Again, this community map, we're hoping that it's updated so we can see, how we utilize it throughout the year.
Mm-hmm. And Carolyn, I want to ask about the community mapping that was done in Sturgeon with some of the young people that you were working with, because I know that you had shared with me an example of the voices that are at the table when you're collecting this data or engaging with them, where I feel and I don't want to put words in your mouth, so correct me where I'm wrong. You've talked about that there was some community members that were there, but the youth didn't feel they were able to engage, and later in emails, or they would tell you on the side that this is what they really feel about it. I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about some of those spaces some people feel are coming into this type of area.
Yeah, so when I was talking about facilitating that space to conduct the community mapping exercise and who's to be engaged, and I did very briefly, you might want to do it separately with different groups because some people may not feel safe to share their experiences. And so when we were doing an exercise in Sturgeon Lake, we asked youth what their thoughts were about different measures that were being used to assess their mental health. And at first, everyone said, oh, they're great. These are really, important measures to be asked. And, we need to have these conversations. And that seemed too good to be true for a researcher. I was like, well, usually there's a bit of debate over what measures are used and how they're used. So I offered them the opportunity to provide written feedback directly on the measures of how they would like to be asked, or what types of questions they would want to be asked, or even domains that they would want to be asked about to get a holistic picture of their health and social well-being. And by doing that, we heard from the youth that they didn't like the questions and that they had things to offer on how questions could be asked of them around their health and social outcomes. And so again, when we're trying to do systems change and we're trying to facilitate spaces, make sure that there's a variety of tools that can be used to make sure that everyone feels included, to have their voices be heard, but also to implement change. So it's just, again, very important to meet youth where they're at.
Mm-hmm. And we talk about this meeting youth where they're at, or like meaningful engagement or authentic engagement. What are some of those things? What could they look like? And I feel like, I just want to ask Claire or Carolyn about that, or how can we build off of that conversation?
Right. I feel like in our focal groups that we had, that was really stressed. Like, what does a safe space look like to you? And again, it goes back to meeting them with it where they're at on their level of understanding. It could be food security. It could be being connected to a safe elder. So you ask yourself those questions as well, like you test your own knowledge, like, well, what does that even look like, right? We're shifting in a different time where, youth are speaking up, they're having more connection to their identity. There's more accessible services to them with their identity as well. We're implementing different reconciliation services, as well as safe spaces for the LGBTQ2+ community as well. So those are all really important pieces to understand that youth are the ones who have that power to change what that looks like in services and organizations, and what that space is. And again, it's all up to what that looks like to a youth. Again, Carolyn was talking about different creative ways where youth are able to voice, have a voice. And I think also for organizations, it's important to create that space where youth are able to come in as who they are. And, again, we're meeting them with where they're at.
Mm-hmm. Also, I'm opening up opening it up to questions now. If people have questions, and there was a Candace that had said they'd like to share a piece of their work. So Candace, you wanna?
Yes, absolutely. So it's called Youth in Transit. It was created by young people from all over Saskatchewan. So our organization works with youth 14 to 24 in or from care, whether that be the Ministry of Social Services or Justice. And so we were finding that kids were aging out, but they had no idea what to do. They didn't know where to go. Really similar to the community mapping. I really love this. But I did want to share this with you because I don't know if you know it exists. And so it's, hang on, let me get it open. So this is, can you guys see it okay? So you can kind of see how it's like broken down.
Not quite.
I can't see my view, so I probably, hang on.
If you move it closer, yeah, to the camera.
So, oh, I see it now. Okay, there we go. So you can kind of see how we've broken it down. And then in each section, so it's color coded. Oh, you have one. Great. And then each section is like, they can write in it. And this was all done, like I said, by young people. We did a lot of focus groups. But these books are totally free. So if you ever come across young people who need these, I am more than happy to send them out to you. I really enjoyed the presentation today, and I would definitely love to possibly work with you in the future. This was really great to see. And this whole organization exists because a couple of young people at a conference and some social workers got together, chit-chatted and said, hey, we need something for us. So I think there might be some things that you guys possibly may not know exist, and I'd love to have those discussions with you guys in the future. And I just wanted to thank you for your presentation.
Thank you. And what organization are you with?
We're Saskatchewan Youth in Care and Custody Network.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll have to have some more conversations.
Absolutely, I think so.
Yeah, well, and I think there's just a big benefit of having young people involved in this type of work. For myself, I was involved in this. I've been involved in this type of work for the last 9 years, and one of the reasons why I'm in the position that I am in is because some of you took the chance to hear me, to acknowledge me in a way that was meaningful for me. But also taking the opportunity to be like, hey, you made me believe in the idea that I can move forward. You made me believe in the idea that I actually have some value, that I can move forward.
Absolutely. And that's what we stand behind. We have Child and Youth in Care Week. So it's a whole week dedicated to young people by young people who created postcards and sent them to the Minister of Social Services. We do an awards banquet, not based off talent, based off who they are. And there's awards and certificates, and yeah, I just think we could really partner up or just, network together. I feel like we have lots to offer each other. So
thank you. And
yes,
do we have some more people that want to share or ask more questions or just to explore it a little bit? Because I know we have some time together, because I think a part of this type of conversation is that we really want to have opportunities for people to talk about some of their experience, some of the things that they're doing, but also ask questions. So that's why we have time for that, if people want to explore that.
I guess I'm curious about the guide on the page and where I can find that.
Definitely. This could be found through our CBYF Regina.ca. So CBYF, I'll just put it in the chat actually. But yeah, so again, what we did, we sent this out to like the schools, we hung it up in friendship centers. We just really wanted to get it out there. And this was completed October of last year. So it is, fairly new. And again, the youth, they conducted all of this research in October. So, you know, they did a great job at doing that, but I would be happy to share that guide on the page with you.
I want to call my friend Clay out. We've had some long talks about engagement and the importance of engagement. I was wondering if I can call you out so we can explore that conversation a little bit more.
Yeah, it sounds good, Cliff. I was actually curious about some of the questions that was asked in the community mapping process, and just wondered what further conversation resulted from the questions that the group asked. Because it sounds like I appreciated the point that it's not an inventory, and that's ongoing live partnership or strategy that has multiple stakeholders. So I wonder, after asking some of those questions, what kind of conversations resulted? So one of the questions that stood out for me, of course, that was asked was, are there missing voices? So even from that one question, what was the conversation like afterwards with the groups when you went through this process, when you asked that question?
I can jump in quickly, Clay, just to throw it back to Clifford, but it was really one of the programs that was identified through community mapping was a girl empowerment program for girls between the ages of 10 and 13. And then the boys were like, well, why do they have a program? Why don't we have a program? And so that really led to Clifford engaging with a similar age group of boys to co-create that same program, but for boys and meeting boys' needs and what they wanted to talk about. So I'll just pass it to Cliff to talk about that process.
Yeah, so that was something that was identified after Carolyn's master's, and so and if that was something that was being identified from young people working in our community, we decided that, okay, well, then this is something that we'll work with. And so through a year and a half or close to 2 years of engaging our young males within community, we were able to get to a space that was comfortable for them to talk about what they're going through or what they want or what they envision themselves in moving forward. And so a lot of this, not necessarily the community mapping piece, but it's more of the engagement piece, is that we didn't have a lot of funding for our research. So we bought a bunch of board games. And through a year and a half of working with them around these board games to get them to understand, how can we work together? How can we navigate these processes of like challenging ourselves around, how do we kill this particular thing within the board game? Or how do we finesse one of each other? And just a lot of it was around how do we relate to each other, and how do we connect, and how do we just see each other? And so through that process, surprisingly enough, because we're Indigenous community, the young people are asking questions about the importance of language. Like, why do I need to know my language? People tell me that I should know my language, but I don't understand why. Or like, I had one young person was ready to they almost had like a whole like debate ready to challenge me around, like, why do we need to understand community, or like, why do we have to engage in culture? I don't get it. It feels like a set of rituals, but I think at the time is that the knowledge keeper, the elder, sometimes it's hard for the young person to understand the rationale behind some of our ways of doing. And so I was like, no, like I understand, and I kind of get what your experience, because when I was younger too, I was like, why are we doing these things? And so for me, in some of my roles, getting to understand like some of these important culture teachings, and at different points, it's I would take them out into the community with the van, and we had gotten stuck at one point, and so I was like, okay, I'm gonna show us all how to get out of the ditch. And so I was like, I need to find me some sticks. So we all went trying to find sticks, and we were all like putting them together, and like there was like 8 of us, and so we all pushed it out. And and that's part of the youth engagement part, is also being in that process with them, giving that a little bit of vulnerability on your end, and putting down the title that you hold, and just being able to just sit in that moment and experience that with them. Marcy, you had a question?
Hi, yes, thanks. First of all, I just wanted to say that the work that you are all doing with the youth and your methods of engagement sound incredible, and it sounds like you're getting a lot of really good information. And those community guides I see would be so helpful. Something that we hear. So I don't know all of you here on the call, but I'm with the Advocate for Children and Youth, and so a lot of what we hear from young people all the time is just not being aware of what services are available to them. So those guides are so exciting. And I just had a question for you. And I know that the webinar next week is going to be on what a youth hub might look like in practice that's connected to integrated youth services. But I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about, does the research that you're doing within these youth engagement sessions, will that be connected, like in terms of the youth identifying gaps in services and things like that? Will that be connected to the youth hubs that are, I think intended to be part of this integrated youth services strategy in Saskatchewan? And if so, what will the connection between your research and those hubs be?
I think I think I'm gonna ask Pam for some assistance around that, because you can put it in a little bit more smoother terms than I'm going to be able to put it into.
Yes, hi. So I would say, to answer your question, Marcy, we're looking at in our process of implementing integrated youth services as something that we want to co-create with our young people. So we did put a call out earlier, I think last month, and now actually have finalized the names for our youth co-design team, who's going to be helping us in a more focal point identify some areas of services and resources that they might know, because they're spread out across the province, and in some places where there are a lot of resources and places where there is literally none. So our hope is to connect with those young people, have them provide some thoughts, ideas, suggestions, identifying gaps, identifying possible resources, and figuring out how we could look at when bringing services to our province here, how we can do that, and working together as a team to identify what are the best approaches, and listening to communities as what's going to work there and what will work. If we're talking about services in Regina, what works in Regina probably does not work in Nipawin, or probably doesn't work in PA, or probably doesn't work in Rolo, any of our small places, or maybe it does work the same. We'd want to hear from our communities there and some of our local youth there too, to figure out when services come to Saskatchewan, how do we've identified maybe what we need. We've talked to our young people so they can tell us for sure what they're looking for versus what we think they need, and working together to create that solution and answer of how do we get those resources or services accessible for our young people here.
Great, thank you, Pam. That's really helpful.
Yeah, I don't know if Claire or Carolyn or Pam want to add any more in more conversation, or we can probably wrap up a little bit early.
I was just going to add to Clay's comment and to Marcy's just now, when you're doing community mapping, it's important to also think about the resources. So mapping out, time and commitment, and, maybe it's a mental health service provider that is really an asset to that community. And so how do you capture that within the mapping exercise to, maybe get their position cost shared? Maybe they can become full-time instead of part-time. What funding and support are being offered to institutions? right? So we talked about, there was a girl empowerment program that was funded by the Canadian Women's Foundation in Sturgeon, but there was the need for a boy empowerment programming, and there wasn't funding for that. And so when you're conducting community mapping, think of it again as those informal, so individual strengths and gifts that one has, as well as community organizations. So maybe certain neighborhoods have more resources and are able to, put on drop-in soccer game in a park. And that's really beneficial and cost effective. And then also think about it from an institutional level of, what funding and support are offered. Is there libraries in the community that you're developing this map in? If not, like, how could a library be of a resource? So just think very broadly in how you define that resource that you're trying to include in your mapping. And that would be my final note. I could talk all day about community mapping, but that's my last bit. So thank you to the Saskatchewan IYS team for inviting me. It's been a pleasure working with you.
Yes, and thank you again. Thank you all for coming out to listen to me and Carolyn talk about the importance of community mapping and engaging with youth. Thank you, Saskatchewan IYS team as well. Thanks.
Carolyn, I think you had one more question there from Clay.
Yeah, Clay, if you want to drop me your email address, or Clifford has it, then he could just put us in contact by email, and I'm happy to share those resources.
And we have one more person's hand up there.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, my name's Delano. I represent Choke Cherry Studios. So you guys can look us up on our social, Google us, right? We're a youth-based art-based organization in Saskatoon. And a lot of our programming and services is developed from the needs of the youth, right? So we have our own kind of methods of mapping, right? And all that. So I'm just wondering, like with what you provided, what are your guys' next steps with all this information you gathered?
I might jump back in here. Thanks for that question. Right now, our role in this is getting communities, I think, to start thinking about maybe what they know about themselves, maybe what they don't know about their communities right now. And we thought it would be a really good opportunity to bring in, our local context here with Claire, in particular in Regina and to Saskatchewan, about how they looked at engaging their young people and seeing what resources and supports are available, or what was important to them to identify. And I know with the experience Dr. Melro has, and also it happening a little bit in Saskatchewan, but across a few different other networks that she has, what they found was really important for them in that piece. And what we were hoping to do with our participants here today is maybe to get them start thinking about that. We have a lot of different resources that some of us are aware of. Thank you, Candace, for bringing up the lovely resource and tool that's been developed with young people that, some folks in this meeting were well aware of, and some maybe not. Maybe it's the first time you've seen that or heard about that tool that's available here. And really just thinking through what do we know about our communities, or the community that we're in, and maybe what we still need to figure out, and how are we going to continue to engage our young people, knowing that Sask IYS is hoping to shift and transform a little bit how we're talking about accessing resources and supports in our province here. So right now, that's the direction we're hoping to go, and hoping to get our communities and organizations really thinking about what do we have here, and what are we doing, and what are we missing, and what do we need to start thinking about what could addressing it look like?
Okay, and so with all the information that you've gathered, are you going to be sending this to like the provincial government for them to further fund youth services?
So when you're asking about the information we're collecting, are you saying like for communities that do like mapping themselves, or?
Communities that are doing mapping themselves, yes.
Right. I think our hope with that information is we'd look to see, you know, what are those maybe consistent gaps and barriers, and what do we need to be looking at bigger picture if we're talking about integrated youth services? Are there things that are very consistent across the map that we need to look at? How does it get addressed in our province? Again, even talking with, you know, the ministries about if we're identifying something very, I guess, common across maybe one of our ministries, whether that be, you know, mental health services, or whether that be education or employment services or social services, or potentially something other that we're not aware of right now. With the information that comes from, you know, communities maybe doing this mapping process, we would look at what's common, maybe what's not common. Are there things that in certain communities, if we're talking about our communities up north, or those that are maybe more rural and remote, we know health services is probably a big factor in something that is really gravely impacted right now with the recruitment process in the health region. Looking at how is that impacting our young people, and what are our options of how do we address this? What, you know, we know our health region's trying right now very hard to recruit in those areas. But we also know that it's impacting our young people when we don't have those resources there. So looking at how we can take that information and what are our options there to address, we're trying one method, is it working? And if not, what are our other options to address it?
I do have to, we are over time a little bit, so I do have to get to a hard stop, unfortunately. You know, I'm glad that we all had the opportunity to share and, you know, feel where we're coming at. And so I really appreciate everybody taking the opportunity to come share some space with us today, because I know that everybody's busy and we can't all be at the same place at the same time. So I appreciate everybody for coming, and for our speakers, Carolyn and Claire, and then Clay and Pam for jumping in, as well as our tech, Amanda Newman. It's been good support, and you know, we'll chat with all you in the coming future. Have a good afternoon.